What's the correct way of steering on a driving test? Can I use one hand to steer on a driving test? Do I have to use push and pull steering on my driving test? All of these are great questions. I'm going to answer them and show you the acceptable methods of steering for your driving test. And then I'm going to show you what exactly the examiners are looking for. The most common method of steering on your driving test, and arguably the safest, is going to be with two hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. And when you steer, as in taking a bend or going around a corner, you're going to use push and pull steering, which means that you're feeding the wheel between your hands, which minimizes the amount of time that you're taking your hands off the steering wheel. I know though that some people can't get to grips with push and pull steering. It's like rubbing your belly and patting your head at the same time. It's difficult. So what else can you do if that's too tricky? Although push and pull steering is considered the safest method, it's not necessary to pass your driving test at all. You could steer, oh, come on, what are you doing on the wrong side of the road? So although push and pull steering is considered the best method, it's not at all necessary to do it on your driving test to pass. What you could do is have one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on the gears, and palm the steering. Practice this before your driving test. Here's another bend. Let's try that again. So I'm just going to push the steering wheel round with one hand, bring it back to level. That's acceptable and it's perfectly okay. Push and pull steering's way too difficult, but is it a fail if I cross my hands on this steering wheel? Let's have a look. That's okay too. The reason that people don't recommend crossing your hands on the steering wheel is because inside the steering wheel, in the middle, there's an airbag. In fact, on most steering wheels, it will say airbag in the middle of the steering wheel. And if you were involved in a collision and the airbag were to deploy, it will come out with such a force that if your hands were crossed over the steering wheel, the airbag would push your arms into your face and you'd be left with a much more serious accident than if you had kept your hands on either side of the steering wheel. But for a driving test, if you can't get to grips with push and pull steering, crossing your arms is not a fail, not a driving fault, and it's perfectly acceptable. The downside to push and pull steering versus how most people drive is that it's much slower to steer. So you're going to need to have a much more reduced cornering speed to be able to get the steering wheel round and back again before you complete the turn. But if you want to take the corner a little bit more quickly, is it okay to just whip the steering wheel around? If you can do it safely, then absolutely, there's no problem with that as well. I'm going to piss off a lot of old school driving instructors with this video. I'm totally here for it. Because in my opinion, I think that is actually essential to be able to steer with one hand. Because let me show you. As I accelerate through this bend, I need to release one hand from the steering wheel to change gear before I return my hand back to the steering wheel anyway. So practicing steering with one hand is essential. If I'm on a road, I'm going around a bend but my windscreen mists up, I need to be able to clear it and be confidently able to steer my vehicle with one hand while I press the demist button. If I lose control of the car while I'm steering with one hand, that's going to be a problem in a real life situation. I need to turn the music down. I need to reapply an indicator. There's so many situations where you need to be able to steer with one hand and be able to control the car safely. It's not a fail or even a driver fault if you steer with one hand, two hands, hands at the bottom, hands at the top, one hand on the windowsill, one hand on the imaginary armrest that I don't have. However you steer is perfectly okay. But what are the examiners looking for on your driving test? There is an entire box on the driving test report form which says steering, where an examiner can mark down how you steer. So on your driving test, they are assessing your steering, but they're assessing your control of the steering wheel. What does that mean? They're looking at if the car's going where you intended it to go. Is it taking the right path around bends? On a left bend, that means you're following the curve of the curb and not going too wide onto the wrong side of the road. On a right turn, that means that what you're doing with the steering wheel is making the car take the correct path into the new road. not cutting corners, not going too wide and having to swan neck into the junction. On a road like this, are you in control of the steering? Is the car going where it's supposed to? Are you having to make course corrections constantly to keep yourself on track? On a tight bend like this, is your steering keeping everybody else safe? Are you in control of the car with what you're doing with the steering wheel? And importantly, when you're pulling over, is what you're doing with the steering making the car go where it needs to go and putting you in the correct space for parking? Now, being in the correct space for parking doesn't mean that you have to be in the parking bay. It just means that you have to be near enough to the curb. About a drain's width away is the maximum. And if you bump the curb, that's clearly you not having good enough spatial awareness and not being in control enough of the steering to get yourself into a parking space without hitting something. So that will be marked down under steering. Now, we're going to pull away again from a space where we've got a vehicle quite close in front of us. Is my steering sufficient that I'll clear that vehicle and not get too close to it? Did I steer enough? Was my steering, was what I did with the steering wheel safe? I think you're getting the idea now. What the examiners aren't looking for is your steering technique. They're looking for what you're doing with the steering wheel and is it safe? Are you able to make the car go where it needs to? And are you in control of it? That's it. Here's an interesting statistic. 82% of everybody who watches this channel isn't subscribed. If you're not subscribed but you enjoy my content and it's helpful, then please do so. It's the button down below. It helps me more than you know. And the more people that subscribe, the better and more helpful content that I can make to get you to pass your driving test. Whether you're subscribed or not, I appreciate all of you. Thank you for watching. YouTube thinks that you'll love this video as well and it'll help you to pass your driving test. Click that and watch it next. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Bye.